Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. Another livestream highlights set, but we are back to using the wheel. One job per duty, but guild tests don't count, which this time actually mattered because, yeah, fun! That said, we of course start with duty 1 as Stick Flicker's Name Takers Incorporated, as Reaper, and Agent Monica is here. We quite easily rush through here, a quick reminder that all the gobs must be killed in this duty to complete it. For duty 2, we're going to the new 7.3 dungeon, so if you don't want to see that, jump to this timestamp here. That said, we of course were an 11-minute replacement Reaper in Meso Terminal. We catch up to the party just as the last pack before the final boss are dealt with, so we really just get the final boss. For the record, at this moment, this is the second time I ever land in this dungeon, and it is not for lack of trying. I would estimate I have at least done like close to a dozen expert roulettes with no luck. But as a result of that, and the fact the first time I went I was playing ranged, I have a bit of trouble with positioning for some of the mechanics while learning them. Early on in the fight, our healer gets donked by being an inch too close to the blue circle knockback. Then, one of the less clear mechanic indicators is the purple lightning memento, where the indicators, as with everything else in this fight, are the fleeing apparitions. The ones fleeing straight in a cardinal direction indicate where the cardinal line will be, and the ones fleeing on the intercardinal indicate where the intercardinal line is. For ranged, you can simply lean back hard on the side where the intercardinal is, but for melees, you either lose uptime or recognize that there is actually a safe spot all the way up at the boss. The second time the mechanic happens, I see this safe spot and then die from my hubris. Later in the fight, our healer dies in the attempt to cross the whole length of the blue circle knockback, but after that point, we carefully push through to the end. For duty 3, we went to Hostile Raves as Pictomancer, and it might shock you to find that nothing of interest happened here. For duty 4, we went to Titan Extreme with both Taldemar and Elana, and the monk knew me. Hello. A way to optimize this particular fight as Pictomancer is to make sure you spend your muses quickly when Titan is attackable, since that means you get to repaint in every section where he jumps away. If you plan it well, you get lots of free damage. In the second bit, our summoner is saved right as they get knocked off the arena. In the final phase, while we do manage to get the ads stacked up next to each other, which is good, they somehow get stacked up on the main tank. So once they're dealt with, Titan will have to be moved quickly. The bomb boulders then take out the summoner again. Moments later, I develop absolute omniscience to predict that Nox was going to dare me to smudge off the arena and do it just as they're about to offer it. I imagine the summoner died to the knockback. But despite all that silliness, we clear up nicely. For both duty 5 and 6, we went to Under the Fridge as Viper. This did get me wondering what the optimal party composition would be to speedrun this duty as fast as possible. While Viper's 308 or so potency per GZD after the second one seems impressive, Reaper's average 330, which is even crazier once Death's Design is up. For duty 7, we went to Zeromus with Yasel and Naomi. A mildly interesting difference for Viper at this level compared to max level is that, first of all, you can much more easily fit 2 whole reawakens in a 20-second buff window, as each reawaken takes like 2.55 seconds less to perform. A knock-on effect of that is that this also gives you 2.55 extra seconds per reawaken to build gauge. Not much, but it does mean slightly more than 10 extra gauge per 2 minutes. Now, in regards to this particular run, during the second phase, one of our healers ended up slipping off the arena. And then, the second heal-up doom late in the fight ends up, in an incredibly shocking twist, killing the other healer from simply not being healed up in time. What are the chances of that? Finally, near the very end of the fight, I carefully calculated and planned the placement of the Limit Break 3. Unfortunately, I didn't account for the possibility that the boss was going to target me in particular, like this. Thankfully, the fight was over anyway. For duty 8, we went to Ramuh Extreme as a 2-minute replacement Black Mage. On the first pull, everything goes sideways almost instantly and we wipe up. And this was despite having discussed strategy somewhat. On the second attempt, we make it all the way to the final phase and then get snowballed by a tether that didn't get resolved fast enough. The reason this happens is that the longer the tether stays around, the more stacks it builds up, increasing its damage, and if either of the tethered players die, it simply jumps to a new person with the same stack count. Usually, you can live up to a few stacks while waiting for an opportunity by simply stopping your attack. But when it suddenly lands on a new player, the 1 or 2 actions they do before they realize the problem can be lethal, and then it just keeps going. On the third attempt, we suddenly have trouble with handling the Horrify debuffs, leading to a lot of unnecessary deaths. Considering I'm pretty sure we had discussed this earlier in the duty, it brings up a related topic. I'm sure you know of those memes about someone just being fully tapped out, just listening to music or whatever while the raid leader is explaining a mechanic. The importance of paying attention while mechanics and strategy is being discussed is that even if you are sure you know everything you need about the thing being discussed, first of all, you might actually not, or the discussion might lead to a change of plans that you then miss out on by not paying attention. Or alternatively, you did in fact not get it, but you weren't paying attention, so you still don't. So, be sure to at least have half or a whole ear still paying attention to something like that, so you don't become the awkward one that goofs it because you weren't listening. In the case of this party, it is perfectly possible that those that didn't understand it was because they didn't have enough experience with the encounter to realize that was what was being discussed. But then, you know, they could have asked for clarification. And then for the fourth pull, we start a bit awkwardly with one of the tanks dying super early. During the ad phase, one of our summoners dies suddenly from too many overlapping AoEs, and we finish the ad phase in the awkward overlap where Ramuh gets interrupted in the middle of the chaotic strike sequence. This is made even more problematic as it catches and kills one of the tanks as a result, and the Rolling Thunder tether also goes on me. While the tank is raised again, the other tank simply has to steamroll over them to get the orbs in time to not also die. Once I finally can move again, there simply aren't enough orbs to solve the tether, which itself can be a bit of a snowball as the tanks also need a steady supply of orbs. We eventually manage to stabilize again and then wrap up the fight. For duty 9, we went to Garuda Extreme as Astrologian, and the Dark Knight from Ramuh Extreme is also here. On the first attempt, the Satin Plume manages to get its sleep off, which doesn't immediately wipe us, but definitely causes trouble. The ads are also not handled very efficiently, and ultimately the confusion leads to way too many attacks hurting the rocks. In the end, we don't manage to handle the ads fast enough, not that it would have mattered, as Aerial Blast would kill us without the extra help, due to having too few rocks remaining to weaken it. On the second attempt, after some strategy discussion, we managed to get the plumes dealt with in good time, and while the position of the ads isn't perfect, we managed to get rid of Tirada, making things way easier. With most of the rocks still standing, Aerial Blast also is way more survivable. In the final phase, we also managed to get the plumes down fast, including the spiny one, as its barrier isn't needed, and dealing with it is often just too hard for the average group. Tank Limit Break is also used correctly to overcome the lack of the spiny plume barrier. The fact we needed Tank LB so early though, did give a strong indication that our damage was kinda low. This also leads to another ad phase, and despite all the chaos, we still managed to mop that up too, although I and others die in the process. We managed to succeed. For duty 10, we went to Castrum Meridianum as Dragoon, and this group goes like slightly slower than average, but that could just as much be because of Dragoon as anything else. I guess this is a decent opportunity for the small reminder that Art of War at this level is a gain on 1. Even if you aren't auto-attacking, I'd argue it is easier to just spam Art of War since you don't need to think about cast times. On a completely different note, if Dragoon was a Pokemon, what typing would it have? On the one hand, Dragon makes sense since Dragoon, not to mention the kinds of attacks it uses. Some would argue that Fairy makes sense since Dragoon is meant to counter dragons. Then again, it's not like Dragoon is particularly well protected against dragons, so maybe Dragon works better since that means they counter each other. For the second typing, I personally would go with Flying since Pokemon that are very focused on jumping have a likely relation there due to the move Bounce. Fire could also make sense due to the amount of fiery attacks the job has. What do you think makes sense? For Duty 11, we're revisiting that corporation to take back our names as Dancer. This is a good time as any to bring up the reminder that Standard Finish does the primary target damage to whoever's closest, so you have to get really up in there if you want to be sure the barricades take the damage, for instance. Although, I'd say the more important part is to prepare Standard Step while running between fights, if possible, and otherwise, making sure to use Standard Step as much as possible anyway. For Duty 12, we went to Odin in Urth's Fount. As a dancer, a thing you can do to optimize in this fight is to hold feathers for either if damage is needed, like if the team is having trouble with the damage intake from the spears, or to simply hold 3 for the final DPS check at the end. In this particular team, the DPS check conveniently started right around when I was using Standard Step anyway, so that went really well. By the way, back in Endwalker, we managed to demonstrate that this fight can be beaten synced with just 3 players, although maybe with a bit of echo. The main thing preventing a 2-player clear, I think, is the fact that Odin does too much damage for any of the tanks to handle the self-healing on their own, and Odin also deals too much damage for a DPS or healer to tank it reliably. So any 2-player composition would be a tank and a healer. Maybe 2 tanks, but I don't think that would be enough of a damage gain, if any. On top of that, because this is technically not an extreme, the echo per wipe is 10%, up to a maximum of 50% instead of half of that. So you can get quite juiced up, hence why the problem is specifically that you need a healer present, and a tank present. For Duty 13, we went to M2N, Honeybee Lovely, as Machinist. Overall, the fight goes really well, but in the last fifth or so, suddenly a lot of people go down, finishing with just 1 healer alive. That does manage to get a tank back up, and somehow survives the tank buster targeting them. Then, Alarm Pheromones comes, the awkward one. In retrospect, the best move here would probably have been to just send the healer LB and then hope we all survive. Because the alternative was a healer trying to dodge everything perfectly, which just didn't work out. There are also a few points where it might be arguable that it made more sense to just hardcast a raise in a moment where there was time, but ultimately, things just went really sideways quite suddenly. On the run back, only one of the healers died once, so a much smoother go at it that time. For Duty 14, we went to Club of Acquaintances as Ninja, so time to get those 1-2s in. I think the most interesting thing that happened here was that we had 2 classes. For Duty 15, we went to O4N, Exdeath, and Ilana, Gazel, and Marcus are here. Exdeath makes use of both Pyretic after Fire, but also Deep Freeze after Blizzard, and both of these sneak up on me initially due to how rare this specific duty is. On the ninja part though, specifically for level 70 and 71, there's a pretty cursed optimization of making use of Tenchijin, the ability to set up Suiton, instead of setting it up beforehand since Meisui is not available yet. Personally, I don't know how big of a difference it makes in total damage output, and I don't know the exact sequence to perform it, so I simply try to do my best with the burst that develops after Meisui is unlocked. If I was a ninja main, I would probably care more. That said, this duty went quite well, and I'd also say quite fast. This was faster than some Alexander raids, I'm pretty sure. For Duty 16, we went to Copied Factory as a 19-minute replacement Gunbreaker, meaning we just barely catch Engels. And this fight also dragged on for quite a bit, partly due to the amount of deaths we observed. On the bright side, the add phase went alright as each tank intercepted the appropriate add-on time. A fun little detail about that add phase is that 2P cleaves down all the small guys almost immediately, so you can just ignore those. On a different note, completely unrelated to this specific raid, I've noticed more and more black mages that will just sit in Astral Fire with like half or no MP left while not in combat. this is your PSA that Umbral Soul exists, so just swap to Ice and then Umbral Soul to reset. At max level, I can see more of a reason to sit in Astral Fire, since maybe you have a mostly ready Flare Star ready to go, but if you're going to start the next fight with Blizzard 3, Blizzard 4 anyway, then just cut out the middleman. Speaking of middleman, the final boss also went quite well, with not that much to write home about. For duty 17, we went to a Relic Reborn, Chimera, as summoner, with what appears to be that same tank from some of the extremes earlier. This one is a quite easy fight though, as it is, for the most part, the same mechanics as the one from Cutter's Cry. I believe the persistent ice AoEs no longer exist in Cutter's Cry though, and this version also has a backside AoE, and if the fight actually drags on long enough, also gets a raid wide to use. Anyway, we wrapped this up really fast with no issues. For duty 18, we went to Friendly Hangouts as Red Mage, with 3 classes this time. At least Red Mage has both magic types at this level, not that it really matters. And finally for duty 19, we went to Garuda Hard with Marcus. And after the extreme version from earlier, this is a breeze. There isn't really much special I can say here either, as Red Mage to double 50 is genuinely its starting toolkit. It works exactly as you'd expect. Maybe timing Scatter when the initial plumes spawn could be handy? Another one of those sets where we get nearly 20 duties without even trying. Thanks, I guess, skill tests? Aside from that, the interesting duties were particularly interesting this time around, I would say, and now we have passed 28 55ths of the way to the achievement. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, Red Mage's acceleration used to work very differently. Initially, it had a much shorter 35-second cooldown and 10-second duration, and just guaranteed the Thunder or the Arrows proc. It didn't make them instant or anything. Then with Shadowbringers, it was changed to the next 3 casts being guaranteed to proc, with a 20-second duration and 55-second cooldown. And then in Endwalker, it was changed to the kind of effect it has now.